Welcome to episode 35 in our series on Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's The Path of the Just, and we are about to begin chapter 20, which is the chapter entitled Assessing Piety. And in this chapter we deal with the boundaries of piety and our real analysis of our deeds to consider how powerful they are, whether they're harmful in certain situations. Is it possible to be too pious? Is it possible to be pious but at the wrong time? These are all the subjects that we're going to deal with in this chapter. So let's get right into it. So the Ramchal begins. What needs to be explained at this point is how to assess the nature of this kind of piety. This is a matter of the highest importance. You should be aware that in actuality this is the most difficult aspect of piety because of the subtleties involved, and the evil inclination readily finds an opening into this domain. Therefore, one finds himself on very dangerous ground here, for there are many good things that the evil inclination may reject as if they were harmful, and many sins that it may turn into important mitzvot. In reality, one must fulfill three requirements to succeed in this assessment. He must have the most truthful of hearts, whose sole inclination is to please God. He must analyze his actions intensely and try to rectify them with this self-same purpose in mind. And in addition to all of this, he must cast his burden upon the Eternal. With reference to such a person, it can be said, and he quotes from Psalms 84 verse 6, "Praiseworthy is the man whose strength is in you. He will withhold no goodness from those who walk in perfect innocence." That's also from Psalms 84:12. However, if he fails to fulfill one of these conditions, he will never attain perfection, and he is likely to stumble and fall. For if his intentions are not the most selective and the purest, or if he is lax in the analysis that he is capable of doing, or if after doing all of this he does not place his trust in his master, it will be difficult for him not to fall. Yet, if he fulfills all three conditions properly, integrity of thought, analysis, and trust, then certainly he will walk securely and no harm will befall him. This is what Hannah prophesied in Shemuel 2, verse 9. He will protect the feet, or in other words, ways of his pious ones. Similarly, King David said in Psalms 37:28, "And he will not forsake his pious ones. They will be eternally protected." What we must understand is that matters of piety cannot be evaluated by the initial impression that one's actions create. Rather, one must analyze and ponder the consequences of his actions. For although the deed itself appears to be good, its harmful consequences will force him to forego the deed, because implementing it will make him a sinner instead of a pious person. So the Ramchal is setting up our understanding. Really, he's been talking about the various ways to achieve piety, but really he's taken it now to another level. He's requesting that we place further analysis on our actions and our thoughts to actually think, is this the right time for this act of piety? Is this what will be the long-term consequences of this act? And sometimes it's not 100% clear. One may think and go along with the mindset that everything you do that is pious must have a happy ending. But that's not always the case. And he's going to bring a few examples from history that prove otherwise. So let's continue. He brings the episode of Gedaliahu ben Achicham. The Ramchal continues. The episode of Gedaliahu ben Achicham clearly illustrates this point. As a result of his overly pious response in not condemning Ishmael or not tolerating slander, he said to Yochanan ben Kareach, "You are speaking falsely about Ishmael." That's from Yirmiyahu 40, verse 16. And what happened as a result of this? It led to Gedaliahu's ben Achicham's death and Israel's dispersion in exile, and the remaining embers of Israel were extinguished. And the death of those men who were killed was attributed by Scripture to him, as if he had killed them himself, as indicated by the comments of our sages of blessed memory. Did Gedaliah kill them? Wasn't it Yishmael who killed them? That's from Nidar 61a. On the verse of Yirmiyahu 41:9, all the corpses of the men that he killed through the hand of Gedaliahu. Now the Ramchal is going to bring the case of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And just to remind you of the episode, how it goes was a certain man had a friend named Kamsa and an enemy called Bar Kamsa. He once made a party and said to his servant, "Go and bring Kamsa." The man went and wrongly brought Bar Kamsa. When the man who gave the party found Bar Kamsa there, he said, "See, you are my enemy. What are you doing here? Get out." And said Bar Kamsa, "Since I'm already here, let me stay, and I will pay you for whatever I eat and drink." The host said, "Absolutely not." Then he replied, "Then let me give you half of the cost of the party." The host refused. Bar Kamsa said, "Then let me pay for the whole party." Still the host refused, and took him by his hand and threw him out, so embarrassed him. Said Bar Kamsa, "Since the rabbis were sitting there and did not stop him, this shows that they all agreed with him. I will go and inform against them to the government." So he went and said to the Roman emperor, "The Jews are rebelling against you." The emperor replied, "How can I know this is true?" Bar Kamsa said, "Send them an offering and see whether they will offer it on the altar." So he sent with Bar Kamsa a fine calf. Whilst on the way, he made a blemish on its upper lip, or as some say, on the white of its eye, in a place where we count it as a blemish, but the Romans did not. The rabbis were inclined to offer it in order not to offend the government. Said Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas to them, "People will say the blemished animals are offered on the altar because they propose to sacrifice it just to please the government. They then propose to kill Bar Kamsa so that he should not go and inform against them." But Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas said to them, "Is one who makes a blemish on consecrated animals to be put to death?" You see, this was the act of piety that we're talking about, that's sometimes mistimed. And the story continues. Rabbi Yochanan thereupon remarked, "Because of the scrupulousness of Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas, our house has been destroyed, our temple burnt, and we ourselves exiled from our land." The emperor dispatched Nero, the Caesar, against the Jews. As he was coming, he shot an arrow towards the east and then fell in Jerusalem. So basically, that's the story that we're talking about, the piety. Let me read it for how the Ramchal describes it. The second Beis HaMikdash, this is the Ramchal's words. The second Beis HaMikdash was also destroyed by piety of this nature, which was not properly evaluated. Regarding the episode of Bar Kamsa, they said, and he quotes from Gittin 56a, "The sages advised that the blemished animal that Bar Kamsa brought as a sacrifice, should be offered as a sacrifice. But Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas said, they will assume that it is permissible to sacrifice a blemished animal on the altar. They advised killing Bar Kamsa, but Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas said that they will assume that one who blemishes a sacrificial animal is punishable by the death penalty. During the course of events, the evildoer, referring to Bar Kamsa, went off and slandered the community of Israel. The emperor came and destroyed Jerusalem. This is what Rabbi Yochanan was referring to when he said, the humility of Rabbi Zechariah destroyed our Beis Hamikdash, burnt our sanctuary, and exiled us amongst the nations. So you see, one should not judge the piety of a deed by the initial impression it makes. Rather, one must appraise, as far as his intelligence will permit, the overall implications until he is able to objectively assess what will serve him better, doing the deed or not doing it. So this is very important. Sometimes the situation is far more complex than we realize, and we have to sit back without responding immediately, analyze from a higher vantage point the long term or the or alternate effects of our deeds. Is it going to do the community good or not? It's very important. And now the Ramchal describes how a rebuke may be also harmful. So Ramchal continues. For example, the Torah has commanded us in Vayikra 19 verse 17, continually reprove your fellow man. So on numerous occasions one undertakes to rebuke sinners at a place or time where his words will not be accepted, thereby causing them to press onwards with their wickedness and to desecrate the name of the Eternal, adding rebellion to the sins already committed. Acting in such a manner is not piety, and one should rather be silent, as our sages of blessed memory have said. Just as it is a mitzvah to say what will be heard, it is also a mitzvah not to say what will not be heard. That's from Yevamos 65b. So very important. If you're going to admonish someone for committing a sin or a misdeed in public, you're likely to embarrass him, and those feelings of embarrassment are likely to well outweigh any type of improvement you would have perhaps nudged to that fellow man or woman. And you may have a response that is based purely on the way you admonish the person rather than what you are admonishing them about. And embarrassment can do many, many things, bad things. It can fire up many harmful emotions. Likewise, and the Ramchal continues, likewise, it is obvious that a person ought to run to fulfill a mitzvah and to try to be among those who occupy themselves with its performance. But there are times when this may lead to disputes, and then the mitzvah will be debased, and the name of heaven will be desecrated more than it will be honored. Under such circumstances, it is surely incumbent upon the pious person to forego the performance of the mitzvah rather than to pursue it. Similarly, they of blessed memory said in the context of the Levites, this is from Bamidbar Rabbah 5 verse 1, because they, referring to the Leviim who carried the vessels of the tabernacle, knew that the reward for those who carried the ark was greater, they would cease carrying the table and the menorah and the altars, would all run towards the ark for the sake of the reward. This led to quarrels. One saying, I'm carrying it on this end, and the other saying, I'm carrying it on this end. This in turn led to frivolous behavior on their part and their penalization by the divine presence. And now the Ramchal is going to teach us how one must never be embarrassed to fulfill an actual mitzvah. So the Ramchal continues. A person must observe all of the mitzvot meticulously, without fear or embarrassment, no matter in whose presence he finds himself, as it is stated in Psalms 119 verse 46, and I will speak of your testimonies before kings, and I will not be ashamed. Similarly, we have been taught in Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 5, Mishnah 20, be bold as a leopard, light as an eagle, fleet as a deer, and courageous as a lion, to do the will of your Father in heaven. Yet, even here, one must use discrimination and discernment, because the need to set one's face like stone refers only to the mitzvot themselves, since our obligation to fulfill them is absolute. And now the Ramchal is going to describe under certain conditions acts of piety should be avoided. to prevent others from reacting with ridicule. Most people who believe very strongly in something are prepared to go beyond perhaps what is normal to display this act, or display this attitude, or try and teach a lesson to people. Here the Ramchal is going to describe to us that sometimes we have to measure our actions in public in case the scoffers, which there will always be, plan to ridicule the person who is trying to be a good example. So the Ramchal continues. However, there are certain additional aspects of piety that, if a person were to practice them publicly, would cause people to make fun of him and ridicule him, rendering those people sinners and liable to punishment because of him. In actuality, he could have refrained from these things, since they are not absolutely obligatory. In this case, it is surely more befitting for a pious person to forego something of this nature rather than to proceed with it. This is what is stated in Scripture, and he quotes from Micha 6 verse 8, and to walk modestly with your God. Many outstandingly pious men refrained from their accustomed ways of piety when in public to avoid the appearance of haughtiness. In summation, anything that is an essential part of the mitzvah must be performed, despite all mockery, while what is not essential and causes derision and sarcasm should not be performed. We see from this that one who truly wants to conduct himself in a pious manner must assess all his actions in relation to their consequences and in relation to the circumstances surrounding them, the time, the social environment, the situation and the place. If abstaining from a deed would lead to greater sanctification of the name of heaven and will be more pleasing to God than complying with it, then a person should abstain from doing this. Or, if one deed appears good now, but its consequences are foreseen as bad, or the circumstances under which it occurs are bad, while another deed appears bad, but what will emerge from it is good, the totality of one's action should be defined in accordance with the outcome and the consequences, for this is the true fruit of one's deeds. All of this can only be conveyed to an insightful heart and an honest mind, for the details are endless and cannot be delineated. And it quotes from Proverbs chapter 2 verse 6, the Eternal will impart wisdom from his mouth. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. So now we're going to move on to a famous story regarding Rabbi Tarfon. I'll just give you a background before I continue with Ramchal's words to what he's going to describe. He's going to describe the Rabbi Tarfon and how he observed the Shema prayers. So we know that the Shema prayers has in it a line that says when you're supposed to say the Shema when you lie down and when you get up. So we interpret this to mean in the morning for when you get up, and also lie down at a certain time of the day. The house of Shammai, Beit Shammai, believed the verse addressed the actual physical position of one's body when one recites the Shema. Now we know that Beis Shammai was always more stringent, more strict than Beis Hillel, the kind of complementary house that would argue with each other. And I wouldn't say opposing, but they were kind of, they supported each other in some ways. But as we know, Beis Hillel was the more lenient one, and therefore most of the laws were according to Beis Hillel. But here, Beis Shammai believed that it was actually your position of your body. If when you say lie down, you have to say it whilst you're horizontal. While the Beis Hillel believed that Shema should be read in any position. As the Mishnah explains, I'm going to quote, Beis Shammai says, in the evening, every man should recline and recite the Shema. As in the morning, he should stand, as it says, and when you lie down and when you get up. Beit Hillel says that every man should recite in his own way, as it says, and when you walk on the way. Why then is it said, and when you lie down and when you get up? At the time when people lie down and at the time when people rise up. Rabbi Tarfon says, I was once walking by the way, and I reclined to recite the Shema according to the words of Beit Shammai, and I incurred danger from robbers. They said to him, you deserved to come to harm because you acted against the words of Beit Hillel. So, very interesting. Let's hear what the Ramchal, how he analyzes the situation. So the Ramchal continues. What happened to Rabbi Tarfon, where it is quoted from Brachot 10b, who was attacked by robbers as a result of his adherence to the ruling of Beis Shammai regarding the manner in which the Shema is recited, will substantiate this. He had accepted the more stringent ruling of Beis Shammai, whereby the sages told him, you deserve to be punished because you disobeyed the words of Beis Hillel, even though the ruling he followed was of a greater stringency. So sometimes being more kind of machmir is not the right way, as we can see from this story. And now we are, and he continues, the Ramchal continues, the reason they told him this is because the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel was a very grave matter for the community of Israel, due to the intensity of the dispute that broke out between them, the two schools of thought. Ultimately, it concluded with a permanent halakhic ruling in accordance with Beis Hillel. For the sake of the preservation of the Torah, this ruling will forever retain its full potency and will not be weakened in any manner, lest the Torah, heaven forbid, becomes like two Torahs. Therefore, the opinion of this Mishnah is that there is greater piety adhering to the rule of Beis Hillel, even if it involves greater leniency, and to act more stringently in accordance with the ruling of Beis Shammai. This should serve as a guide, permitting us to see the path where the true and faithful light resides, for the sake of doing that which is just in the eyes of the Eternal. So that concludes Chapter 20, Assessing Piety, where we're taught about the guidelines regarding the boundaries and the looking at being pious from a higher level than before, than thought possible even before. Before we were taught about how to act piously. This is a grade higher. This is knowing how to use that talent or that kind of wisdom that we have now earned through the hard work of character refinement. Now, how to wield piety is also something powerful, and it needs to be measured as any other type of attribute. So that's a fantastic chapter, and I look forward to next episode's chapter 21, which deals with acquiring piety.